All right. Is it my turn now, I guess?
Oh, you mean.
All right. So I guess we'll just start with the first question. Uh, and as y'all know, I'm not a big talker, so I'm going to need all the help I can get. Just have a good discussion. First question is: humanity does not like to admit when they don't know something. Has this been true in your experiences with other people? Yes or no? Please give an elaborate example. And I just thought of two examples, kind of on of what I've had of it, kind of went both ways. Uh, the most recent example for me was, and I told Cameron and Rick this today. I went and bought a new computer back during the week, and went to the guy's house, and I got there, and you could tell he was like a major computer guy. He lives and breathes computers. Mike Holland set me up with him, so just imagine. Uh, but I get there, and he's telling me all about what he's put in my computer and stuff like that, and all of the processors and all the numbers and letters that go along with that. And I'm just standing there nodding the whole time, like I know what I'm talking about, like I know at all what I'm talking about. And we get back in the car, and Kyle Davis looks at me and he goes, "I'm glad you knew what he was talking about." I was like, "I have no idea what he was talking about." I just kind of nodded and went with it. And I guess that I do that a lot. I guess whenever I'm around someone and I have no idea what they're talking about, I don't ever say, really, for the most part, I have no idea what you're talking about. I just kind of do the old nod and let that go. But the other example I thought of that went the other way was whenever I was in Martin. I worked at a cattle farm, and me and one other guy started at the same time. His name was Barkley, and we kind of got out there, and the farm manager was asking us, what do we know about cows? And I said, just very little. And he turned to Barkley, and Barkley was like, "I'm just going to be honest. I have no idea what I'm doing out here, but I'm willing to learn." And that was just two examples I thought of. Is there anything else anyone can think of?
I think something that I've seen is not, and I'm not talking about my current employer, so just let me get that out there. I don't want to get fired as a result of my answer, so I'm not talking about Tri County, but in one of my previous jobs, I saw a lot of decision making, I guess, in upper management that affected a lot of just let's say a lot of hands-on people, and a lot of times the upper management doesn't have a clue with what's going on in some of the hands-on type positions. So I think there's a lot of disconnect there. But then I think the problem is that whenever they make those decisions, they assume that they know everything that goes on, and I think it kind of has a negative effect on the workers and really the company as a whole. It was just kind of one of the things that I saw. And another one that I thought of, a lot of my examples go back to soccer, but anyway, that's just the way it is. Whenever we're trying to get coaches and stuff for the league, a lot of times we're getting people that are first time coaches, never coached before, which is fine. Everybody's got a place, everybody's got to start somewhere. But whenever they get into it, a lot of them aren't they don't want to ask for help, and it's just kind of a stubbornness. And I've got that exact same stubbornness too. But even though you don't know what's going on, there's sometimes that you just don't want to ask for help, and uh, that's I'm as guilty of that as anybody though.
Yeah. And one other thing I could think of where I've done this several times is not so much that I didn't admit. I guess I didn't admit to myself that I didn't know what I was doing, but just maybe a few times whenever I started in on my truck or maybe on a boat working on it, and then quickly realized I had no idea what I was doing, and then just kind of ended up putting myself in a bigger mess than what I had to begin with, which is why my truck is at the shop right now and not uh, and I guess this would be a question to someone probably not me. Did people used to be this way back in the day, or is this like a new thing?
I guess me being the elder here, I think, or one
That's
of
about
virtually in two ways. This is not a new thing. We can look back and see things that sometimes we don't want to admit we didn't know anything about. And I guess I want to go back even further, maybe in the Bible. If you want to really take a look at this, let's look at the Pharisees and what their thoughts were in the Bible of how they pretty well thought that they knew everything and how it should be and how it would be. And I think that that's probably a good example of way back in the day. But in my day, it's always been the same thing too. We could, especially when you had, and Kyle made a good example of a disconnect between administration and the laborer, because a lot of times administration wants to think that they know exactly what's going through, the laborers are going through, but sometimes they don't, because they may not have been on the front line like they have, and probably a lot of examples for that same thing out there.
Yeah. Does anybody else have anything to add as far as how this, if it used to be like that back in the day? And I guess biblical times is a good example of that. There's lots of people who really thought they had it figured out, and as we read in the Bible, they didn't have it figured out.
I don't know about, again, I don't know about back in the day. I don't know that I can speak to that. But just thinking about this one, for me at least, I'm not a big fan of admitting if I don't know something, just for the fact that it's almost, I don't know if inferiority is the right word or not, but we really, or at least me personally, I'm not a fan of, of swallowing that pill or taking that hit to the old pride. Sorry, that's my laundry. But when I know that we've even talked, a few of us in this meeting have even talked about it before, just individuals that won't let go of any sense of maybe, not being the expert in some area. And I can relate, because I've been there before. I've pretended like I've known a little bit more than maybe I thought I should have, and it's caught up to me. So I definitely understand where some people have been talking about this.
Yeah, that's a lot of it. It's for a lot of people, and I guess including me, sometimes it's a pride thing. Like, you might feel kind of embarrassed to admit that you don't have it all figured out. And then, like Cameron said, it can come back and bite you. I guess moving on to question 2. In the sermon, there were a few quick references to people who went back to the beginning when spreading the gospel. And I wrote down just a couple of what Cameron said. Of course, John and First John, which kind of say the same thing. And in your opinion, what are some good scriptures that we can highlight when trying to do this ourselves? If anybody has those pulled up, I've got some. If y'all want to start looking, I've got some here that I've bookmarked that I thought would be good ones. Which, I mean, obviously, whenever you're trying to go back to the beginning, there's not really a better place to start with that than Genesis. I mean, that is the beginning. So whenever you're trying to reference the beginning, what better than the beginning? But another one I wrote down was Hebrews chapter 3, verse 4, which says, for every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything. I just thought that was a good one when Paul goes back and references the beginning. Another one I wrote down was Psalms 33:6, which if I couldn't find it. It says, by the word of the Lord, the heavens were made, their starry host by breath of his mouth, which I think is just another one where it goes back and references the beginning. Has anyone else got any verses that they like that reference the beginning?
I picked out a couple here. I got Romans 1:20, which says, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse.
Yeah. That's another good one. Does anybody else have a verse that they might have found that they liked for reference going back to the beginning?
I kind of looked at it a little differently. Like I went back to, you know, if we're trying to start, you know, evangelizing with somebody and we're just trying to talk about Jesus and his character, you know, more than anything else, like as far as like creation and things. I kind of looked at it as like some of the core values, some of the I guess you could say basic principles, you know, that we think about whenever we think of Christ. So I kind of approached it from that, and I've got, you know, I was just looking at some of the things um, that kind of tell us about Jesus, and that's kind of the way that some of the verses that I pulled. I pulled John 3:16. I think everybody knows that one. Just talking about, you know, Jesus' love, just kind of a basic principle that, even though it's basic, it's obviously, you know, super important. I pulled Luke 6:31, is the golden rule, doing to others, and that's just kind of going back to the, you know, basic principle of how to live. Um, Romans 3:23, you know, all have sinned and fall short of God's glory, but yet you can kind of tie that in to John 3:16. And then Mark 12, verses 30 and 31. Um, I'll read that. It says, "And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandments greater than these." So if you want to look at just, you know, a couple of verses there that really carry a lot of weight, those two things, those are straight from Jesus' mouth. You know, love God with everything you got, and love each other. So that was just some of the ones I picked out.
Yeah, those are good. I didn't even think about it just as a like a just I guess kind of the root of our faith.
Right.
Yeah. And I guess we'll go ahead and move on to question 3. There were 3 different ways given to defend God's existence. What are they? Which if someone wants to say them, or I've got them wrote down, however we want to go about this. We had the cause and effect, which, you know, Cameron talked about this morning, kind of the scientists, and going back to, if you ask the scientists, you know, they've got it all figured out as far as how everything got here. You know, it all started from the particle, but when you ask them how the particle got there, they don't really know how the particle got there. It just, I guess they just think it happened upon it. And then you have the divine design, you know, how complex things are. Cameron talked about how, you know, they'll parade around a robotic arm that they can get to open a bottle, but they'll even own up to they can't even design something near as complex as how our own arm works. And then the morality, which was the last one he said, you know, he referenced well, someone questions it, why can't you just, you know, take their wallet? Why is that wrong? And out of those 3 things, you know, which one sticks out to you the most? I guess for me, go ahead. Go ahead, Leah.
Well, always interrupting me. I think that the one that stuck out the most for me was the divine design one, because I think that a lot of times when you're first talking about the gospel with someone, you have to really emphasize how much God loves us and cares for us and show that he's going to support us. And I thought of the verse, it's in Isaiah 64:7-8, and it says that, "O Lord, you are the Father, we are the clay, and you are the potter. We are all formed by your hand." And I thought of that verse because it really shows that, like, God takes the time with, like, just like a potter, like with each one of his creations and with each one of his works, he puts the time and effort into it to make it unique, to put his effort into it to show that he loves us. And I just think that building on that, you really can form the foundation of love to form a true faith in God.
Yeah, I have it marked on here too. The divine design one is the one that sticks out to me the most too, because there's just so many things that, you know, like Cameron was saying, the tilt of the earth, how far we are away from the sun, like so many different factors that are just right that just make it seem like how else could it ever have been anything other than a divine design. Is there any of the Does anybody have any of the others that stuck out to them a lot? Want to elaborate on that?
I think the one about the morality really caught my attention, not just because you said Ralph Gilmore said punch somebody in the mouth and steal their wallet. I thought that was funny, but you know, it's you kind of, we have this what's right and what's wrong in our mind without even opening up any book, right? I mean, it's just one of those things that's just, it's given to us. And, you know, people can, you know, an atheist can deny that this is God inspired if they want to, but yet they can't deny the fact that they have something in them that was given to them without reading. And I thought that was, that one really stuck out to me this morning, especially the way that you presented it, Cameron. That was really good. That was the one that really stuck in my mind.
Yeah, and that one stuck out to me too. It was funny from what the Ralph Gilmore thing, but then also, you know, everyone, it doesn't matter where you go. Of course, whenever I've been down in Mexico, no one speaks the same language, but you still know, you know, how to treat people. You know what's okay and what's not okay, and that was one that stuck out a lot to me. Does anyone have anything to say on the cause and effect one? I didn't write anything down with it.
It wasn't my favorite, but I'll talk about it. The reason it's probably thrown in there with the other two, because without a doubt the other two would be my go-to. You know, if I had my choosing, is it kind of puts the other person in the driver's seat, as far as it puts the other person in the driver's seat as far as asking them the questions. It's not. I guess I like that it's not about me giving my spiel or me giving my scientific facts or me preaching my sermon, but continuing to ask those questions with that person who has all the answers until they run out of answers, and kind of hitting that wall. So that's the reason it sticks with me. I hope that didn't sound like, I can't think of any word other than diabolical, but like to plan that out beforehand, premeditate somebody running out of answers like that. It's not how it's intended, just, you know, to help people to think, I think, but myself included when I think like that.
Yeah, and it's like what you were talking about, you know, the scientists have it figured out, and if you just keep going back with them, they, on the particle, they can't, like what you said, the particle was the one that really stuck out to me. They just can't explain where the particle came from. But if you go back on ours, we have a really good explanation on where everything came from. Of course, that being God.
Also, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
On the cause and effect, I mean, that very, the others kind of maybe stood out a little bit more to me, but the cause and effect, I felt like it kind of building on what you said, Cameron, I guess, like in that case, it's almost like you're just kind of the, I don't know, moderator, if you will, and they can put, like you said, put them in the driver's seat, and sort of over time, it's like they're almost, I wouldn't say teaching themselves, but at the same time, you're not just, you know, spewing stuff at them, but it's giving them time to process and almost teach themselves to a degree, but you're kind of moderating, like, you know, so what do you think about that? Or where would you think that came from? Or it's just kind of like you're just helping them to teach themselves to a degree.
Well, I think where cause and effect comes in is for somebody who doesn't know God. You know, when you think about divine design, you know, they still have to have, if they don't know God, they still don't know that. And the same way with morality, you know, morality kind of falls from law, what established by the land. But really, if you looked at laws that are established by the land, a majority, not all, come from some type of biblical reference. You know, thou shalt not kill. You know, that's a law because it's not supposed to kill anybody. But I think about cause and effect, you know, that's for somebody who, if you went to, I think you mentioned, say you go to Africa, or you go to somewhere, some tribe, somewhere, wherever, you know, well, where did you come from? If you know, and how did you get here? Okay, well, how did they get here? Well, I came from mom and dad. Well, how did they get here? And where did that? How did it all begin? You know, they but they're probably not. They may probably do not. Maybe they have their God or person they worship. You have a better explanation that you can follow into from that.
Yeah, and that kind of, well, I guess what you just said kind of hit all three at the same time. All of those about how, you know, I don't guess I've ever been around anybody who has never heard any form of the gospel, but you know, if you were to go one of those tribes who haven't, then I'm sure they have their own set of laws. It might not be exactly like ours, but they would have some sort of morals there as far as, you know, probably no stealing, no killing, things like that we have. Now, I guess moving on down to number 4, what are some Bible terms that you think would be really confusing for someone who is new to the gospel? And I wrote several down here, but probably the one that I think would be the most confusing to someone would be eternity. And I mean, just if you really don't think about it, it's not that, and I've thought about this one a bunch. If you really just don't think about it, eternity is not that complicated. Eternity is forever. But when you really sit down and you're like, well, eternity as far as God, you know, he's always been here. There's no start to him. And trying to explain that to someone who's never heard that before could be really confusing and really hard for them to grasp. And I mean, it's still uh, not a hard concept, but it's still just a different concept, or not different. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it's still a hard concept for a lot of people to wrap their mind around. And, you know, as far as after you die, there's still an eternity. You'll either be in heaven forever, you'll be in hell forever. And well, that's another one. I wrote down the concept of heaven and hell. Like, I mean, I'm sure everyone has their own opinion of that, and even people who might not have heard the gospel have heard the terms heaven and hell, and they probably would refer to heaven as a good place and hell as a bad place. But you know, if you get into the Bible, it's a lot more to it than that. You know, heaven is being with God, and hell is being away from God, and in just a place of misery. What does anybody else have anything that they wrote down that would be just a really hard concept for maybe a new person to the gospel to understand?
I think just sometimes looking at it from like thinking of the perspective of someone who's never heard anything from the Bible before, and then they're approached by someone who says, okay, there's this guy, he's everywhere, but he's nowhere, and he knows what's going to happen to you, but he doesn't control your life, and you have to be good, but you also can't be bad, because then you can't be with him anymore, but he sent his son to die for you, would just be such a crazy thing to hear for the first time when you've never heard anything like that before. It sounds semi-ridiculous. So just being approached with that idea would be something that would be a bit of a culture shock, I think.
Yeah, and if you've never heard anything about it before, you know, just the idea of Christianity would be just a really foreign concept, and something that would be really hard for you to get your mind around, and would probably take, you know, a lot of explaining from, you know, you or whoever was talking to the person about Christianity. And that was another thing I wrote down here was God's plan with Jesus. You know, that to us, of course, because we've grown up this whole time in the church and everything and heard it, you know, probably hundreds of times about how all that works. You know, God sending his son to die for us, for our sins, would be a really hard thing for a new Christian or someone who hasn't heard the gospel, who's just hearing it for the first time, to understand how all that works or why that was necessary, or, you know, things like that. Anybody else have anything they want to add?
I also think too, it's hard to explain to somebody who isn't a Christian that we're not going to have an explanation for everything, like for all of our questions, and we're not going to ever be able to fully understand the whole entirety of God and the Bible. And like, it's just not in our human capacity to be able to understand that. But it's also like our like human nature to want to know everything, and like to want to be able to find stuff out, especially for what he was talking about this morning, for like scientists or people that are used to having to find a logical answer. Like, it's hard, I think, for some people to acknowledge that I'm not going to be able to know the why, and I'm not going to be able to know like the explanation to everything, but that doesn't mean it's not real. So I guess that's kind of a hard concept to accept, I guess.
Yeah. And, you know, that's another thing I was just thinking about as you were saying that too. That's a lot where our faith comes in. And that's why we still, you know, like we're at church this morning, listen to a lesson while we're having the Zoom Bible study, because we don't know it all and we want to keep learning, and we should want to keep learning about the Bible and God and Jesus and what all's going on. And there's really, with this one, I started writing down things, and I was like, well, there's just, you know, a lot in the Bible that if you had never heard the gospel before would be really, really confusing. And as I was writing them down, I was like, well, these would also be really, really confusing topics if you were trying to explain them to somebody for the first time. Like if some guy walked up to you and he said, hey, I've never read the Bible before. Tell me what God's plan was with Jesus, or tell me what does eternity mean? Then it would be hard to put something like that into words. Like we all have our own way that we think of it, but you know, it might just be really hard to get into words as far as to explain to somebody that's never heard it. And of course, I'm sure as you would be explaining any of these things, then there would be, you know, lots of questions that would come from it. And if they asked you about God's plan, you say, well, he sent his son to die for his sins. You're like, well, why did it have to be why did he send his son? Why did he have to die? Why couldn't he have just came here? You know, there's all kinds of questions and things like that. And really just the entire Bible would be pretty confusing for someone who's never been taught about it or hasn't grown up with it.
One of the terms.
Whoa.
Go ahead, Lydia. Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry. Oh, wait. Well, excuse me. All right. One of the terms that's always, it's kind of hard for me to get my head around is the Trinity. And I think, you know, somebody that's new to it, that would absolutely blow their minds. How can three things be one, but then one thing be three? You know, and that's just one of the terms that it's a hard one to, I can't put my head around it. So that's just one of the ones that kind of stuck out whenever I read that. Sorry,
Yeah.
Lydia. Go ahead.
And that would be something that would be odd, you know, telling someone, okay, there's these three different things,
Yeah.
and they're all different, but at the same time, they're all the same. And it could get really confusing really fast with that.
Yeah.
It's funny, Kyle. I was going to say, it's kind of like Jacob said something about a lot of us have grown up in the church and we've heard these stories a million times, but still, if someone walks into the adult class and says, okay, today we're going to talk about Revelations, or today we're going to talk about the Holy Trinity, everybody's kind of like, oh, whoa, because there's still things that we can't wrap our mind around. So I think that it's important when we're talking about these new things with people to say, like, it's okay if you don't understand, because like that's why we're here, that's why we fellowship, that's why we learn together, that's why we study our Bible, is because God wants us to constantly be growing in our faith, and he provides us with the space to grow consistently.
And it's like, I know I'm in the men's class a lot with, of course, you, Kyle, and some others in here, and sitting in there a lot of times, you know, I'll get in there and they'll get into a good conversation, and I've realized it very quickly gets over my head in there, you know, and I learn a lot from just sitting in there and just listening. And some of those terms do confuse me, and sometimes I just sit there and I'm like, okay, this is gone way over my head. But you know, a lot of times I learn quite a bit, and even the guys who are in there who are talking, I'm sure they're still studying their Bible and trying to learn more as much as they can.
I'm one of those that I really tend to really simplify things. So you guys, I mean, y'all, everybody's made really good points, but that's, my mind does not go to the big picture like that. It doesn't go to those things. My mind goes to the person who's never been told, never been taught, never stepped foot in a church. They've made it through most of their, you know, childhood and adult life, and never even been around people who have been around church and everything. Like, in talking about Bible terms, if you really simplify it, there's a great number of people in the world that don't even know what communion means. Simple terms like, not to take away from like the big terms like the Holy Trinity and the ideas that are in the Bible, but if you just say, for instance, I'm having a conversation with someone at work and we're just, they're a Christian, I'm a Christian, and we're talking about church and hey, we did this and yeah, the Lord's Supper and communion and this thing right here. There may be somebody that walks by or someone with an earshot that has absolutely no idea what the Lord's Supper is. Why that's a concept in the Bible. They may have no idea what even the word communion means. I just think some of the things that are, if you really simplify them down, this is why Cameron's lessons have been so eye-opening to me about reframing the gospel, because we all do, just sitting here right now, we all do think, hey, people are going to come to church and they're going to come to our Bible classes and they're going to want to know what the Trinity is and they're going to know what this is and they're going to want to know what this is. When in reality, when you reframe the gospel, there may be somebody that doesn't know what the word baptism means. And you have to really, really get down to like almost a childlike level for some people, because they've never even come in contact with it. And the sad thing about it is we do live in the Bible Belt and we are in the South, and I hope the majority of people do have those basic terms and those basic concepts. But I guess when you work with the public like I do, it's pretty eye-opening when you start learning and seeing the amount of people that have no idea what those simple terms mean. There's a lot of people that don't even know what the term denomination means and things like that. So I guess that's just the way my mind works. And talking about reframing the gospel, it is sometimes you gotta simplify it way down to almost like you're talking to small children. And I feel like we could reach more people if we did that, not in a demeaning way, but just in those simplified terms.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Like, for someone who might have not ever been to church or grew up in church, if they decide they want to come to church and they walk in and sit down in the adult class and, you're having like a really in-depth study on part of the Bible, they might not even realize how you got to that point. They might, I don't want to make this sound like in a bad way, but it almost be like if you took one of the really young children out of their class and were like, all right, you've had this class, now you're going to come sit in the adult class and have an in-depth study. And it would just kind of, if you did that, it could be really overwhelming really quick to someone who hasn't ever heard the gospel before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's see what my next question was. For number 5, of course, we didn't get to the 4-part challenge because the radio cut us short today. But does anybody have any additional comments or thoughts just about anything that we've been over, or just anything, I guess?
I know I'm talking a lot. I'm sorry.
I'm very.
I can't say how much this reframing the gospel thing has just been so eye-opening to me, and it's just since last Sunday. And when I say eye-opening, I mean when I go through my daily routine and I'm at work and I'm out and about and I'm doing all these things, it's just, I don't know. I'm learning and recognizing more the need to meet people where they're at and reframe the gospel. Whereas before this, I probably just want to be bopping around down the road and mind my own business and not really do it. But now, I'm really starting to pay more attention, I guess, to why we need to do that, and paying attention for opportunities on how we can do that, I guess. And just an example is we were at work one day and we have a hospice chaplain, and he and I were talking about communion and Lord's Supper and stuff like that. And I have been making our own communion bread since we do it here at home. I've been making my own, and so there was one of the nurses had walked by and A, couldn't figure out why in the world I would make homemade communion bread, and B, didn't even know what communion bread was, and C, just all these different things. And it's kind of like I said, in that moment, I was able to recognize this is what Cameron's been talking about. This right here, like that she has no idea why we do what we do. So I like it. Good job. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, and I was just sitting here looking at what I wrote down for that last question, and it's like you're talking about with communion. Someone might have questions about communion that could easily turn into questions about salvation or in God's plan with Jesus or heaven and hell. It could go basically cover the whole Bible. Just one question might turn into a lot because they all kind of build on each other. Does anybody else have anything to add?
So since Martha and Barry are paying for the Belmont education, I might as well share with you all so we get our money's worth. But I'm actually in an intercultural communication class right now. And one of the things we just learned was that in every culture and every country, cutting in line is really frowned upon. And so I'm really big on connections. Like Rachel said, I like connecting things to places. So I was thinking about like the morality thing and how like something as simple as cutting line is frowned upon. And there's no way of knowing why that's connected to every culture. But like, I think it's been really helpful throughout this lesson to like show things like connecting us as people to connect us through religion. And I think that seeing people at the base of as a person and then developing the religious connection further is really helpful. And I think the series has done a good job of that.
Does anybody else have anything they want to add? I think I've about exhausted all my thoughts for the day.
I think it causes me to think, which I started thinking about this a while back, but we take something as simple as God forgives us no matter what. We pray, He forgives. We ask, He forgives. There are people out there that they think they're so low in the low as low can get, and they've done so many things wrong that God won't forgive them. And it's something simple as we think God, we know God will forgive us, but there are people out there that just give up and they think they're unforgivable. And it's just, you hear about stories all the time where there are murderers in prison that's found Christ and they understand that no matter what they did wrong, they can ask for forgiveness and God will forgive them. And there are people in our community right now that they just truly believe that they're just God will not forgive them no matter what. And that's something simple we could teach people, that no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, God will forgive you. You just need to ask, and that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and that's another good thing too, as far as like for us, that's just something that we know and that we probably just take for granted that most other people would know the same thing. But we probably walk by people every day that think like that think I've done too much and there's no hope for me, and just don't know and would need I guess a good in-depth explanation as to how all that works to get them back on the right track. Anybody else have anything they want to add?
I'm going to add something here that, we talk about people that don't know the gospel or anything like that, but we also have to realize people within our own congregation that maybe, is a challenge, that maybe they are a recent convert, or maybe they're new to the church, or maybe they just didn't grow up in the church or whatever. So some of the times we have to think about, as we're teaching, that we make sure that that everybody in your class is understanding exactly what you're trying to talk about, because it's hard sometimes when you have so much different I guess maturity, Christian maturity within, or biblical maturity within the congregation. Sometimes to make sure that people understand exactly what point you are trying to make, because sometimes we realize people outside the gospel may not know a lot, but we also have to realize we have people within our congregation at different levels, so that way we want to make sure they have that opportunity to fill those gaps also, of learning to get to make sure they are able to grow also.
Yeah, and that kind of makes me think of what I was talking about, like in the men's class. There's several different levels of learning in there. You've got me, who I'll own up to, it's probably at the lower level of my Bible knowledge in there, in which I'm also probably quite a bit younger than most people in there. And then one person I think of whenever I think of the men's class is Randy Kirby. He's always, I can tell he's really knowledgeable, and he's done some serious studying in the Bible, and you can talk about something and he knows who wrote it and things like that. And that's how I'd like to be one day, is having the knowledge like that, to be able to just think of a spot in the Bible and know the things without having to go in and do the research. And another thing I was thinking about as you were talking is like in the first century church, or everybody now for the most part has parents that might not be going to church all the time, but have probably told them something about it, or friends at school or something like that. But back in the first century church, this would have been a really new idea, and they would have been having to have these, I guess, kind of conversations that we're talking about. They would be challenging conversations with pretty much everybody that walked through the door. And I just really can't imagine how challenging that would have been. Anybody else have anything?
I really liked the connection that Barry made between, I guess, bringing this not just as binoculars where we look outward into the world, use all these concepts to look outward into the world, but also being mindful of them with each other and within the church. It would be unfair to have 275, 300 people listening to a sermon on Sunday and just assume that every single one of them believe God exists with the same fullness and sureness that I believe it, or that they understand every single verse and its context and meaning the way that those of us that have been in Bible classes for years have. So I think that sense of consideration with people outside in the world, but also with our own brothers and sisters, will go a real far way.
Yeah, and I think that's when it kind of, you do a really good job at this, Cameron, bringing in like I guess kind of simplifying the examples down. Some of the examples that you give, if you just thought about the example, you wouldn't know how to relate it, but then you do a really good job at bringing it into the Bible and how you can relate those things back, and it makes a lot more sense whenever you bring those examples out.
Appreciate you, man.
Does anybody have anything else? I know we've been on this one for a while. All right. We want to close in prayer. All right. Please bow. Dear Lord, thank you for this day, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to meet here online and learn more about you and learn more about how to spread your word. And Lord, maybe help us to reach those who might not know as much about the gospel or may not have heard about the gospel, and bring them to you. Lord, please bless us the rest of this day. In Jesus' name, amen.